right, hello and welcome to another episode of Letters from Camp. Tonight, I'm pleased to be joined by three guests. So we have Oscar, Jeff, and Charlie Maxwell. How's it going, everyone?
It's going great.
Going well.
So, really excited about this episode because we get to talk to people all in the same family who've all worked at camp, and so get to hear some of kind of how that started and things like that. Um, we always like to start with people's camp stories. So, talking about when you first came to camp, when, your camper years, staff areas you worked in, that type of thing. So, Jeff, why don't we start with you and you can kind of get us started with your kind of camp story?
My camp story is a little bit funny. Is when I was a Cub Scout, I went to Camp Split Rock and I had a really great time. And so I knew I wanted to go to Camp Winoxet. But our Cub Scout pack did not have a crossover to the local Troop 1 Harvard, as I grew up in Harvard. And so I'd gone to Split Rock in 1979 as a Weeblo, and I wanted to go to camp, Boy Scout camp, because I was of age in 1980. And I had never been to the troop. And so we didn't go with the troop. And I signed up and I went Provo as an 11-year-old and had never been to a troop meeting. And so it was a little daunting. And the senior patrol leader for the Provo troop, funny enough, it was John Mayo. And he was probably 15 or 16 and I was 11. So that was my first introduction to Camp Winoxet, was actually John Mayo. And I had a good enough time that I came back I went week 1 and I went week 5. And I really didn't get the concept of merit badges. So I got some partials, and my father made a deal with me. He's like, I'll pay for your second week of camp, but you got to finish your partials and get the merit badges signed off. And so I did. And that was my beginning at camp. And then I went to camp from 1980 to 1985 and had a great time. And then when I was 17, I joined camp staff. And I was only on camp staff for 1 year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was actually on Camp Split Rock staff when I was 14 in 1983. So.
And what area did you work in that year?
I worked in the Nature Den, and it was just myself and Dan Soames. Dan was a year older than me. He was the nature director. He was 18. I was 17. What was kind of cool back then is we actually slept in the Nature Den. So we just had 2 bunks in the back there. They were bunk beds. And so we just, had our workspace was right there, and we could, chillax right in the back room there. And I was happy to see that they finally took down the wall board that they had put up in the back of the Nature Den, because everybody had all of their initials signed on the wood. And so I could go back and you could look at all the different people's initials from the different years that were back in the Nature Den that went back, I don't know, from the early 70s all the way to the early 90s, whenever they boarded put wallboard in the Nature Den.
Cool. All right. Charlie, why don't you tell us kind of about your camp story here?
Sure, yeah. My first time coming to camp was probably before I remember. I remember my dad always used to take me up on Wednesdays for the barbecue. We'd watch the Gish team. And yeah, it was really, my childhood was definitely rooted in camp. My first year as a camper was 2016. And I think I went both with my Troop 32 Acton, week 3, plus Provo, normally week 6 every year from 2016 to 2019. And then in 2020, I applied to be a CIT, but that year didn't really happen. And then 2021, I was hired on the kitchen crew. I spent the first 3 weeks in the kitchen, and I had a good enough time, but I went to Philmont week 3 and week 4. And when I came back from Philmont, I asked the administration if I could be in program because that's really where my heart lied, and they were super accommodating and they put me down at the waterfront because that's I think where my skill set mostly fits. And yeah, I've been on the waterfront since. So I've been on waterfront staff since 2021, and now I've been an assistant waterfront director since 2023. And I'm signed up to be an assistant waterfront director again this year. I'm super excited for that. And yeah, I think my skill set has only advanced since then on the waterfront. But I do like to pride myself in being really camp first and being able to do whatever camp needs me to do. But really, I've only ever worked on the waterfront for 5 years now.
Awesome. All right, Oscar, how about you?
So, my first year as a camper was supposed to be in 2020, but like Charlie said, COVID happened, so I was not able to attend camp that year. So I went with my troop in 2021, week 3. It was my first week at camp. Had a great time, but it wasn't my first week. Wasn't my first time at Camp Winoxie because my dad brought me up, like Charlie said, at the barbecues, so I was familiar. I did Provo for 2 years along with going with my troop. I had a great time there. And then I applied to be staff I applied to be CIT in 2023, and I was CIT in 2023, and I went with my troop as well. And then I was Brown C staff in 2024, and that was a great time. It's really cool to see how it's run behind the show instead of just being a camper. So it was a great experience.
Awesome. All right, so Jeff, what's it like been watching your sons kind of grow up in scouting and a camp? What's that been like as kind of like a dad to see that happen?
You know what? You becoming a parent, you don't even know. I mean, back when I was having kids, you would be like, you weren't even sure you're going to have boys because back then you weren't thinking about, girls being involved with scouting. So I felt lucky that I had 2 sons that could go into scouting. And then I introduced them to scouting. I said, hey, we're going to try Cub Scouts. But I didn't want to force them to do scouting. I wanted to support them. And if that was something that they had an interest in, I was obviously going to be there and make sure that that was available to them. So I feel really blessed, to be honest with you. And I didn't really give it any thought when I moved to Acton. But if I had moved to a town just on the other side of Acton, my kids wouldn't be going to Camp Winoxie because Acton's on the very eastern side of the council. And that was not planned, but fortuitous that when these 2, Charlie and Oscar wanted to be in scouts and then further themselves, that they could actually be staff members at Camp Winoxie. And so I feel really lucky. And it's kind of cool that they're one of my favorite places, I think, has become one of their favorite places. And they can see everything that I enjoyed about being on camp, the place, and then just having Mike, I'm sure you still have your camp friends are some of your best sets of friends. If something happened, those guys would drop whatever they're doing and be at your side. There's a bond there that working with these guys and having this common goal that is really unbreakable. And I'm glad that they're having their own experiences with their own scouts, their own age, that I think are similar to what I had back in the 80s.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a shared experience. And, you could be in any part of the country. And if you have that bond of being a former staff member, you got places to sleep, you got, people to hang out with, wherever you are, it's pretty awesome. So what are some of the biggest changes you've going from the 80s to now? What are some things that have kind of really changed and what has maybe stayed the same?
I tell them, Charlie and Oscar, that camp is better now than it was when I was a kid. Honestly, there's more program. There's more merit badges that are offered. The camp staff is bigger. The camp staff, I think, is more customer-oriented, service-oriented, enthusiastic. They do a terrific job. When I was a scout, there was only about 8 campsites that were used. So we had a 5-week season with 8 campsites. So you'd have a maximum of about 40 troops that could be there for the summer. So a big week, let's put it this way. In 1985, I think there was about 250 campers for the entire summer. And they can have that in a week. And then the following summer in 1986, where we really tried to have a good staff. And frankly, I think they were given an ultimatum. You got to turn a profit here, or else we're not going to keep on supporting Camp Winoxet. I think we brought in about 500 campers that year, and we doubled it. But that's still only 100 campers a week. It's really a different vibe than what you have up there now. The biggest change physically is when I was young, there was a place called Old Timers, and that was a campsite that was right where Macaulay Field is now. And there were these huge pine trees that were there, like 120-foot pine trees. And there was no undergrowth. It was all pine needles. And instead of tents, they had the Adirondacks that are in some of the different sites now. And that's, each patrol would sleep in an Adirondack. And that was kind of like a coveted campsite because it was centrally based. You didn't have to be in a tent. You could be in these Adirondacks. And they ran into some financial problems in like 1982, 83. And what they ended up doing is harvesting all those pine trees and leveling the whole campsite. And that was, I thought, atrocious, but it happened. And then they turned that into a field. And unfortunately, it took about 10 years for that field to turn into a field that you could use. So we used to call it the blast zone. And it was horribly utilized. And, everybody looks at the field now. It's a nice flat area where there's a lot of activities and it's a positive. But that took a long time for that to be created that way. And the campsite that was there was truly beautiful. Old Timer.
Yeah, I've definitely heard of the campsite. I've seen pictures, but I didn't know that's why they got rid of it. That's interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So for Charlie and Oscar, it doesn't matter which one of you wants to answer first, but what are some of your favorite parts of working at camp now? What do you think, are the highlights for you?
Oscar, I'd be interested to hear what you say.
All right, sure. So I think some of my favorite parts of working at camp is that I get to like surround myself with people who have like other similar interests. Like, I think what's special about Winoxet, it's a summer camp, but the reason it's different from other summer camps is that it's a Boy Scout summer camp. So everyone there kind of shares the same morals, and we all have like something that we can relate to. We all have the uniform. Like, no matter where you're from, you still have the uniform, you still have your troop. So I think it's kind of unique that you have like those built-in groups. You get to meet people from other groups, and just working on camp. When you're a camper, you go and you feel like the magic of camp, like the staff provides for you. You look up to the staff guys and girls in there just doing a great job. And then you can put yourself into their shoes and you can provide for the new young scouts. And it's just great seeing them have a great time because you want to ensure that they have a great time. So you just provide the absolute best program that you can. So it's just like a special camp in the sense that, you're just teaching the kids, the good scout morals. So I just think it just works out really well.
I would say my favorite, I don't know if I'd call it a specific memory because it is repetitive. But making pizzas on Friday nights with the waterfront staff, I think is such a unique tradition, and really shows that the history and tradition that Winoxet has is deep rooted. And Will Neville does say this thing that tradition isn't worth it if you're just doing it for tradition's sake. And I agree with that. But I think one thing that's really cool about Winoxet is we have a lot of good traditions that are worthy of sticking around. And one of those is the pizzas on Friday night. The waterfront staff and the Rangers go in to that kitchen and pump out sometimes over 100 pizzas in like 2 hours, and they're good pizzas. And that is a great way for us as a group to bond and pump out a bunch of pizzas and listen to music and have fun. But it's also a great way to send the scouts out for the week because, you think about it, they come in Sunday night. What do they have in the dining hall? Pizza, right? Then they leave, Saturday. What did they have Friday night? Pizza. So like the first thing they get home, and say to their parents is like, I had pizza. And I don't know, I think it's just cool to have traditions that are actually worthy of sticking around and being traditions, not just for tradition's sake, but because they're really enjoyable for both the staff and the scouts.
Absolutely. And that was a Jeff D special right there. He noticed that a lot of troops were going into town on Friday nights and wanted to corner that market. So Matt Ford became the first pizza chef, and there's been a long line of people who've done that. As a former waterfront director, I was in there as well, and it's really cool. I agree that it's not only good service to the troops, but a good bonding experience for the staff as well. Um, so all three of you mentioned Provo, and if anyone's watching who's kind of wondering about that experience and how it might be different from going with your troop, or what might be some of the benefits of going with Provo, how would you kind of sell them on you should definitely go to Provo and why?
I think the most positive part about Provo is you get to, as Oscar was kind of alluding to earlier, you get to meet scouts from other troops, other towns, potentially out of council, and that's a great experience. Being able to share skills, share stories, sometimes even get like a nice refreshing break from people in your troop that you're always with. And it's just a way to view camp. In a slightly different way that's refreshing and kind of exciting because you're not necessarily with the friends that you're used to and with the scoutmasters that you're used to, kind of forces you to break your bubble a little bit, and I think that's a great experience.
I agree. And I also think that Provo kind of does its own thing. Like, of course, it does other camp programs, but you feel kind of special going to Provo. You get to stay in a cabin, which is nice. So it's more of like a cabin life with your friends. And there's like the Provo Friday night movie night with pizza, and especially if you go week 7, that's super fun because they have Fort Joe and they have all Provo has antics. It's kind of like the ringleader for the one of the sides. So I just recommend Provo a lot, and yeah, it's just super fun. It's also a great way to get more merit badges because it's camp's, I think, the best way to get merit badges.
Plus, it's a great way to avoid big, bold assistant scoutmasters because you have nice camp staff running your Provo troop.
It's true.
All right. So let's head into our lightning round, is the questions we ask all of our guests. So we'll go youngest to oldest on these. So start with you, Oscar. What is your favorite?
I didn't quite hear that. Sorry.
What is your favorite camp song?
Ooh, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to pronounce it, but like King Ganguli Watchuk. That's my favorite.
Charlie, how about you for favorite camp song?
We'll go with Gary Owen.
Good
Classic.
choice. I'm going old school, and they won't let us sing it anymore, but it was Lily the Pink, as it was a
Also a
drinking
classic.
song, and they frowned upon that.
You can find, a good version by like the Irish Rovers on Spotify. Listen to that one.
Yeah.
All right. How about your favorite camp skit?
Well, of course, the best skit was the Oscar and Andy Collins Back to the Future skit, which went back in time to 1986, and we met my dad, who's usually played by Jack Anderson, and they talked about a little bit about the revival of camp and what it was like in '86, and the DeLorean was a metal rowboat. So I think that was a great skit. That was my favorite because I was in it. So I think I know what Charlie means.
Venetian fountains, no doubt.
That was excellent. I'm going to go with the classic J.C. Penney.
Near and dear to my heart. And how about your favorite meal at camp?
I think the chicken patty. I really like the chicken patty. It just hits. It's really simple and good.
They haven't had it in a few years, but I loved Hunter's chicken. I know it's controversial.
and they haven't had this in a while, but I used to enjoy the Wednesday night chicken barbecues. So
Yeah.
I know it was a big pain in the butt, and I know sometimes the chicken was raw, but it was fun.
Hunter's chicken is actually our most popular answer to that question, so you're not alone. And I am old enough to have been to a Wednesday night chicken barbecue as well. All right, how about your favorite place in camp?
That's hard. I'm gonna say the OA campfire. The OA, like right where it's right down by the water, right where the CIT village is. I think that's a really pretty spot, especially when you're in the ceremonies. I like how it's just right on the water. It's yeah, I like the OA field.
I mean, I feel like chapel is a very generic answer. So I'm not going to go with that. I'm going to say the trading post porch on an afternoon with an ice cream.
Good choice. I know this is more Order of the Arrow centric, but if we're talking, it's a Camp Winoxet. Evening up at the OA ring. I know I'm not supposed to give anything away, but like the combination of the moss and the hemlock trees and the backdrop is, I think, unparalleled. It's really cool.
Mm-hmm. All good answers. And lastly, is there anyone you want to give a shout out to as someone you either kind of looked up to or perhaps served as like a mentor to you?
Charlie, do you have an answer? I got to think about that.
That's a really tough one because there's so many. I mean, I feel like I could pretty much pick like any senior staff member when I was a first year junior staff member in 2021. They all took me under their wing. Off the top of my head, I remember Nick Valton teaching me how to water ski. That was pretty cool. And now being able to teach other kids how to water ski, that was sick. But that's one of many, many.
I had a scoutmaster in 1982, Ed Provo, and I think he may have only been on camp staff for 1 or 2 years. His name was Bernie Bro, and he was actually up here for the 100th anniversary this summer. And he was just a really chill guy who was a listener and not a teller. And he was a very kind scoutmaster. And I mean, he was probably in his 20s when I was like 12 or 13, but just a really good soul. The other one who was also really influential, and I was Ranger Jack. He was a guy who you could go to for anything, and he would help solve any problem. You could talk to him about anything. I remember getting an earache in the middle of the night and having to go to the emergency room, and Ranger Jack driving me to the Peterborough Hospital and telling me it was no big deal getting him up at 2 a.m. when I knew it was. And he was also a real nice guy.
I think that an older staffer that really was like somebody I looked up to a lot was Jacob Roger. I think that he's just a great person in general, and he's super kind. He helped me at Provo. He would listen and very kind. I think the funniest person I've met at camp is probably Ranger Dickey. You gotta love Ranger Dickey. He's a great guy.
Excellent. So before we wrap up, I always like to give people opportunity if they have anything that we missed or anything you wanted to kind of say in closing.
I think we were talking about some traditions. I love Fried Food Friday for Brownsea. That's where you just get to fry Oreos and pretty much anything from the trading post. So I like Fried Food Friday.
Thanks.
Charlie, don't you have a pretty funny story with Ranger Dickey, right? Do you know about the stone?
Oh yeah. There's a rock with the name Richard Case or Dick Case in the carved in the stone. And I was with Ranger Dickey, and I asked Ranger Dickey when Dick Case died. And Ranger Dickey said, "That's me. I'm Dick Case." And I hadn't put it together that Ranger Dickey and Dick Case were the same person.
All right. Excellent. Yeah, we keep trying to get Ranger Dickey to come on as a guest, but he has so far staved us off. But we'll get him one day. Jeff, any closing thoughts?
You know what? I was surprised once. What we had to do program in 1986, and it was Gary Shepard challenged Ray Shepard, who was in the Scoutcraft, and myself. I was in nature. Can you guys come up with an afternoon program for some of the kids? And so Ray Shepard and I bandied it about, and he said, "Hey, let's do a muck walk." And we at that time we were trying to capture bullfrogs, but they've since don't do that anymore. And we did it for that summer. We had a blast. We got leeches all over us, did all the muck walk stuff. And that was my only year on staff. And so I was shocked that 40 years later, in 2000, no, maybe it was 30 years later, anyhow, in 2016, when Charlie was going to scout camp for his first year, that they had this thing called the muck walk. I'm like, holy cow, they still have the muck walk? And it was something that we were just doing for the summer, and I had no idea that it had glommed on as part of the program. It had stayed there for all of that time. So I thought that was kind of a funny surprise. I was like, holy cow, it's still the muck walk.
That's awesome. All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and for being my guests this month. To all our viewers, make sure you like and subscribe and do all the things you're supposed to do with these videos. And thank you very much to our guests, Oscar, Jeff, and Charlie Maxwell.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thanks, Mike. Great idea.
Have a good night.